Welcome back to Exceptional Undergrads, a podcast where we interview successful students and explore how they achieve success at a young age. Be sure to check out our show notes at exceptionalundergrads.com for all resources mentioned in today's episode. Today, I welcome Bryce Hopper to the show. Originally from California, Bryce is a current senior at Texas Christian University, double majoring in business information systems and finance. During his time at TCU, he's founded the Korean Language and Cultural Association, as well as being a part of a winning team of the 2023 Dick's Sporting Goods National Case Competition in Pennsylvania. I hope you guys enjoy Bryce's insights into teamwork and public speaking, as well as his unique understanding and logic behind forming discipline. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Bryce Hopper. Bryce Hopper, welcome to the show.
Good to be here, Jack. I'm super excited.
Awesome. I'm really glad to have you here. Would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
I'd love to. Yeah, I'm super excited to be here. So my name is Bryce Hopper. I'm from Northern California. It's the East Bay, not from San Francisco. A little bit out of the city, over the bay, across Oakland, into the hills in this place called the San Ramon Valley. I'm a student at TCU. I'm a senior BIS finance double major with getting a fintech certificate. And I just love philosophy. I love exercising, love to read books. I also picked up a hobby of learning Korean when I was a sophomore in college and ended up starting the Korean Language and Cultural Association at TCU. And we host language sessions to teach students at TCU Korean. I co-founded it with a graduate student from TCU who is from Korea. And so together we do that. We have cultural events and help promote Korean culture. It was just something that kind of helped me build global awareness and learn more and more about the world and kind of build a project in my life that was really challenging, a long-term project that I wanted to stick to. I also mentioned I love exercising. I love calisthenics specifically. So more bodyweight fitness, things like push-ups, pull-ups, and then doing more advanced movements like levers, muscle-ups. And I'm currently working on my planche, long ways off, but it's a long-term goal of mine to do that. I also enjoy reading. Like I love going to the library, reading books, and just kind of studying, thinking. It's just kind of what I love doing, thinking through how problems work and how can you solve problems better. I also like doing things like Sudoku, any types of puzzles that your brain works. I have like Rubik's Cubes on my desk because I just love puzzles and things like that. And then, I said BIS Finance double major. So I go to TCU. I'm a Neely Fellow, which is the honors business students here at TCU. And I ended up also being awarded the Rob Rhodes Learning Mantra Award when I was a sophomore. It's something that is awarded by your cohort to a member each and every year. And so that was one of the greatest awards that I was able to get throughout my time at TCU. I was also a finalist for the Clark Scholars, Clark Fellows program here. And so just really enjoyed my time at TCU and working hard, trying to kind of be in all different areas, whether that be starting an organization, being active in the business school, and then also just finding personal joys through friendships, through my own learnings, and through exercise.
That's a lot. I love it. I feel like you have a very packed college experience, and I definitely want to hear a bunch more about it. I noticed one thing as well, which was this Korean language club that you started up.
Yeah.
Can you tell me the story behind how this came to be? Because founding a random club on a language that's halfway across the world, I feel like that's insane.
Yeah. So when I was a lot younger, like you can think of, like elementary school, whatever, you always think about what would you want to do with your life? And I was like, I would want to learn like Chinese. And then you go to middle school, and in California, you're required to pick up a second language as part of your education. And at the public school system, you can take French or you can take Spanish. And I was like, I don't want to do Spanish. I want to do Chinese, but there was no way that I could do it. And so I had to take Spanish. And I just think I did everything I could not to like it. I was like, this is not what I want to do. Language is stupid. I love math. I love science. I love like logical thinking. And to me, language was just so illogical. And so what's the point? I was like, I'm never going to use this. And I kind of like rebelled against it and got through it as fast as I could, finished Spanish 3, and I was like, I'm done with this. But after my freshman year of college, I was really looking for more challenges in my life and think like a long-term project I could really invest in. And my love of philosophy kind of made me think of language. And I noticed how I think in English, like every thought I have is in English. And in a way, language is restrictive. It's kind of this strange phenomenon where if you think about, you have a thought and then you have to turn it into language or a way of communicating. Another way you can think about this, if you think about programming, right? If you program a website versus a video game versus an application, you use different programming languages. And it's because different programming languages are better or worse at communicating different ideas to the computer. They're better optimized for certain problems. And human language is no different. Some languages are better at one thing than others. So the classic example I like to give between English and Spanish is on the word love. Like in English, we use love for everything. I love pizza. I love my friends. I love my family. And I love exercising, right? But I don't really love those things equally, and there's not the same thing. But if you look at a language like Spanish, you have more than one word for love. You have gusta, you have encantar, and you have amor. And so gusta is more like I like something, and then encantar is a little bit more of a love, and then amor is a much deeper love that you'd have. And so that's just like a simple example about how you can have two languages that are better optimized for communicating a different idea. And so I was really curious, what would it be like if I could learn something that was completely different from English, like in every single way? Because East Anglian languages are developed in a different branch. It's like all the Romance languages, like French, Spanish, English, they all kind of come from Latin, but a lot of the East Asian languages don't come from Latin, so they have a different root. And I was curious what it would be like if I, tried to learn something different, if I could have a new way of thinking about things. So that idea really kind of started getting me curious and excited. And so I was thinking about what language would I want to learn. So I mentioned when I was younger, I was like, oh, I'd want to learn Chinese. And then I was like, maybe I could learn Japanese. But I started looking into East Asian languages and what language I'd want to learn. And Korean to me was just the most beautiful. Like the way that it was written, the structure, the alphabet system, the sound, the grammar, it just fascinated me. And I was like, if I'm going to pick something that I'm going to stick with for a long time, like this is for me a long-term project, something that I want to work on and really commit to, I have to pick the thing that I'm the most excited about. And so I picked Korean. And I just kind of was totally lost. I was just watching YouTube videos by myself, trying to figure it out. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't want to tell anyone for 6 months. I was like, I have to do this for 6 months before I tell anybody, because I didn't want to be like, oh yeah, I'm starting this new project. Then 3 weeks later, somebody's like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, oh, I gave up. It's like, I'm not going to tell anyone for 6 months. I'm just going to get started. But I didn't tell my family, I didn't tell my friends, but I was getting really stuck. And so I knew a teacher I had previously. He was a professor of religion at TCU, and he spoke Japanese fluently. He lived in Japan for many years. And so I just reached out to him and asked him, hey, I'm trying to learn Korean. Do you know anyone who speaks Korean? I'm just looking for somebody to talk to, somebody that I could ask some questions to, maybe give some direction. That's all I'm really looking for. And he knew this graduate student at TCU who's in the PhD program in the English department, who's from Korea. And he connected me with him. I just started kind of talking with him, telling him my interest. He was willing to help me out. So I kind of started meeting with him once a week. And then from there, I realized I knew some other people who were interested in learning Korean that I just happened to run into, kind of just came up in conversation somehow. And so with this graduate student together, we thought, maybe we can do something with this. So at TCU, they have Chinese classes, they have Japanese classes, German, Spanish, things like that, French, but nothing for Korean. So together we decided, what if we start this organization, the Korean Language and Cultural Association, to help create a class. So we have a class every week for students at TCU who are interested in learning Korean. That's just been an amazing experience for me, kind of learning to lead an organization. We have social events every year. We put on this annual Korean culture night, and we had like 200 people come both years, the last 2 years. So it's been a really great experience for me, learning to manage groups, learning to lead an organization, as well as just having a personal experience. And I can say learning a second language is something that I would really recommend for anyone. It's a really challenging process, but it's really fun, and it really helps to grow your cultural awareness and learn more about the world. And it really challenges the way that you think about things, because you'll be interested to see how a different language can communicate the same idea in a very, very different way.
I find it hilarious that you bring this up. And specifically, one point that you said where you're like, I don't want to tell anybody else about this for 6 months so I don't
Uh-huh.
look like a failure if I just immediately give up. I had some of the exact same thoughts that you were thinking about,
Mm-hmm.
where to try and learn a different language that has nothing to do with English, just to see like the
Mm-hmm.
cultural aspect and see how you can talk about different things in like different ways and basically have languages mean different things. I went through this exact same process probably
Mm-hmm.
like 3 months ago. And I was like, I want to do something in my free time that is just challenging for no reason. And I
Uh-huh.
was like, I'm going to try and figure out how to do a language, learn some sort of other language. And I picked Japanese because I researched it and it was like the furthest away from English or something like that, or one of the furthest away. And I was like,
Yeah.
man, I'm going to try this because it's nothing, it makes zero sense to me at all. I have no basis of it. Because I took Spanish, like you said, for all the way up through high school. I even had it in like elementary school for a while. And I have a basic knowledge of Spanish. I'm actually starting to pick that one up again too, because I went to the Spanish club and I decided I was like,
Mm-hmm.
man, I want to try even more and just see what I can do. But I really feel like learning a language is one of those things where it's tough, but it's really rewarding because then you start to think differently. Because now I'll look at certain words and I know like a very basic level of Japanese. Like I'm
Hmm.
working on Duolingo right now. That's all.
Yeah.
That's all I'm doing. But I'll look at certain words and be like, oh, like I know that in Japanese. Then I remember since I'm doing Spanish too, I'm like, oh, I know that in Spanish. And I have to like contrast them. And I was thinking about it this morning. I was like, man, I just the way that sentences are structured in different ways, and you have to like think about it. And then you're thinking about a bunch of different stuff. And you're like, wow, that's insane. So I think learning
Yeah.
language is definitely one of those things to challenge yourself is very good to push yourself in like a different direction than just straight up studying something.
Hmm. Yeah, it's a really different part of the brain, and it's really good for your brain. The other thing I just thought about when you were talking was not telling somebody or not telling people about a project you're doing because you don't want to look like a failure. I would say it's not just about not wanting to look like a failure. It's about really knowing that you're committed because you want to do it. That was what it was for me. I was like, I don't want to do this to tell people, and then feel like I'm doing it out of an obligation to maintain the fact that people think I'm doing this thing. Or I want to do this thing because I want to do it. And I want to prove to myself first that I'm doing this for my own reasons before I start bringing in other people's thoughts or expectations into it. So that was what it really was for me about wanting to not share it. I wasn't really concerned about failing or like failing in front of others, but more in the sense of wanting to have confidence that I was making a decision and following through with something because it was my choice, without having other people influence my decision by being like, hey, are you still doing this? And being like, oh, no, I'm not. It was like, no, I'm committing first. I'm making my decision first before I start to bring other people in on it.
I think that's a good point because having certain things that you're working on that you don't really tell anyone, like you said, it really just like has you develop like a passion or like purpose type thing behind it for you to know internally whenever you reflect back on whatever the activity is that you're doing this for you. And then in the future, if you do end up telling people this stuff, it's like, oh yeah, like I've been learning Korean for like 6 months. Like
Hmm.
I just thought it was really cool one day. It's acting upon things for only yourself and nobody else.
Yeah.
Could you tell me a little bit about the Dick's Sporting Goods national case competition that you won a little bit
Yes.
ago? I'm interested in this. I don't know anything about it. I don't know if the listeners have heard it at all either, but it's you came in first place and it's clearly a substantial accomplishment. So I want to hear all about it.
Yeah. So Dick's Sporting Goods does a annual case competition with Pitt Business out in Pittsburgh, and it's analytics case competition. Our one was not super analytics heavy, but it's this analytics case competition where they put out this business problem for any team to solve. So you form a team of 4 people, and I formed a team of myself and three seniors. There was really one senior who really wanted to do this. He had done it in the past, and he kind of pushed to the university to sponsor us and form this team. And so I ended up joining this team of 4 people, and we had kind of this preliminary round where it was just a pretty short presentation we had to create and submit it, and then we were selected to go into the final 8. So 21 universities first put their bid in, and only 8 go to the final round. For the final round, you go to the Dick's Sporting Goods headquarters to give your presentation. And so we were given a prompt, like this packet, a few weeks in advance, like 2 or 3, maybe 3 or 4 weeks in advance of the case. And so our case was about boosting their 5-year projection for how could they increase the penetration rate of their youth girls apparel private brands. So they have Dick's Sporting Goods sells other brands like Nike and Adidas, but they also have their own private brands. And so we had to come up with a 5-year strategy using the data they gave us, the information, and any research we did for how they could double the penetration rate of their own personal brands. Those are things like their DSG brand or their Calia brand or some of their other own personal brands. And so what I really loved about this experience for me was it really shows the power of working in a team when everyone's bought in. In school, sometimes I feel like you're in a group project and not everyone's bought into that class. It's a core class that's not like super required for their major or whatever. And you're forced to put in this team and you have to do this project. Nobody's like really super gung ho about doing it. They're like, I really only need to get a B plus in this class. So I'm going to put a B plus effort in. And you're like, oh, maybe I want to get an A. So I have to put more effort in or carry the team. And it's hard to get people to meet and nobody really wants to do it. But I got really lucky of being in a team of people who all wanted to be there. And so we were all different majors. We were all different interests. And it allowed us to really see how we could collaborate together. And for me, it was the most formative experience of seeing what a powerful team of people who are all bought in and who are all really excited about collaborating can do. I think the biggest thing that made us a successful team was nobody was afraid, or nobody wanted their idea to succeed. They wanted the best idea to succeed. So if somebody threw out an idea, we were really excited about seeing where that idea could go. But if we decided not to go with it, nobody felt upset that we weren't going with their idea. We kind of had this yes and mentality. It's this mentality I've heard. There's a book about it. I'm forgetting the name. But this yes and mentality where when somebody has an idea, you say yes and you kind of build on top of it and see where it leads rather than saying no, but, or but. Because when you say, hey, you're a really good person, but you have all these problems, it kind of shifts the conversation and kind of becomes an accusatory statement. You say, you're such an awesome friend, and I just want to let you know that this is something that I'm struggling with in our relationship. It completely reframes how that conversation goes. And that was really how our team worked, is it was all yes and. What can we do further and further and further? And we did a lot of research. We went to their stores, we looked at their financial statements, built this presentation, and then went out there, and we were just super, super confident that we did the research, we had a good presentation, and being able to go up there and really present our story and what we want to present really went well for us. And then there's 2 rounds. So the first round, they select the top 3 teams, and then they give you an entirely new prompt to remake your presentation. And we had 45 minutes to remake our presentation with the entirely new prompt, and then give our presentation. We were the first to go, and we did that second one, and we ended up winning first place. And it was just a super, super exciting experience. But I really just recommend anyone, if you're in college, to try those extracurricular opportunities, like a case competition, especially one that you could optionally choose into, because those types of groups are the ones where you can really see the power of working in a team and learn how to really collaborate with somebody when you're both there because you want to be there, not just because you have to get a certain grade in class.
What were some of the lessons that you learned from being in a team that actually was able to work cohesively together?
Yeah, I think the big ones were that yes and mentality I was talking about, really being able to build on people's ideas rather than, be combative, being willing to be loose with your idea in the sense of it's not about if your idea is the one that's selected, it's about if it's the best idea, and that you can contribute not by being the one who made the idea, but by being a part of the team that creates the idea in the end. So don't get attached to your idea being the one that people go with, and get really attached to the problem and winning and succeeding in the long run. And that will allow the best idea to come forth if you're really collaborating, being honest with people, because you don't have to be worried if they're going to take offense because I'm poking holes in their idea. It's all about the long-term success. And then I would say really do due diligent research. So those were things for us, like we read their financial statements in this project. I don't think any other team at that competition did so. There's a lot of really great resources out there that you can find. And a lot of times what separates the teams that win and the teams that don't is if you're willing to take that extra step to learn more, to understand them. And then the last thing I would say is when you're presenting, or this is really when you're presenting anything, because in a way, a case competition, you're selling your idea, or whether you're selling a product, you're selling your idea, you're selling yourself, you're just talking about what's interesting to you. It's all about giving a story, not a reason. So for us, we didn't have, I always think of our opening slide. So if you load Dick's Sporting Goods, their slogan is sports change lives. If you walk into any store, it's on the front door of the store. If you go to their website, it's on the website. Any slogan is sports change lives. And that is our first slide. Our first slide is all about us trying to communicate with Dick's Sporting Goods that we understand you, we understand your target market, and we're here because we want to unify on your message and create a solution that works for you. And every other team that we saw their presentation, their opening slide is Dick's Sporting Goods case competition, university team name. And what makes people remember you is the story you can tell, especially in a case competition like that. Whenever you're presenting for anything, think about the story that you can tell about your problem or how you're solving the problem, or really that you understand them. Because when whoever you're presenting to feels like you understand them, they're much more receptive to your idea, because they are going to give you credit for saying, hey, they've probably thought through some of this stuff, and I'm just going to wait to see when they address it, rather than being really skeptical about, do they even know what they're talking about? Are they sure they understand me? And so I would say really doing our research and telling a story that showed Dick's Sporting Goods that we understood them, our team understood them, was kind of what really helped to set us apart. And so, after our presentation, both presentations, there was a few judges who were really complimenting us a ton and being like, we really saw the research you did, and you were the team that really stood out to us because you showed us that you understood Dick's Sporting Goods. You understood our customer, and why they come to us over our competitors. And that was something that we didn't see from the other teams.
Have you read the book Start With Why by Simon Sinek by chance?
I don't think I've read that book, but I've seen his TED Talk.
Okay.
And I think of his TED Talk where it's not about the how, it's about the why. And if you can sell somebody the why, his TED Talk is really great. Anyone, I would really recommend watching it about, like he talks about Apple in that TED Talk and how Apple starts with the why. And a lot of companies start with the how or what they do. But it's all about why, how, what, not what, how, why.
He calls that framework the golden circle, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
three concentric circles with the why in the middle, then the how, and then the what. And most
Mm-hmm.
people, he says, starts with the what and try and work into the why. But like you were
Yeah.
just saying, if you really understand people and you start with that why and move outward towards the what, then you'll be able to sell yourself or sell any of the stuff that you're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would definitely recommend anyone watch that TED Talk. I haven't read the book, but if there's a book out there, I'll definitely give it a read.
From this competition specifically, you had to do a lot of public speaking with the presentation. And you
Mm-hmm.
said a turnaround really quickly as well, of only 45 minutes to have to switch up your entire thing and then go first. Do you have any public speaking tips that we could use for listeners if they want to get better at public speaking and giving presentations?
Yeah, I think I have two. This is what the way I kind of think about it is number one, nobody on the other side is there looking for you to fail. So when I think about when I've watched presentations in school, like we've all been in middle school and high school and college watching presentations. And I know what it's like to be up there and feel very embarrassed, but I know what it's also like to be in the audience. When I'm in the audience, normally, especially if it's my friend up there, I'm not watching them being like, where are they messing up? Right? Like, where are all the mistakes they're gonna make? I'm just there because I'm watching them, right? I have to watch them in this case. Or if you're going to a presentation, you're there because you're looking to watch that person. You're not looking for them to fail. And so to recognize when you're on stage, when you're the one giving the presentation, that everyone out there is not really looking for you to fail. They're looking for what you have to say. It kind of, for me, took a lot of the pressure off. When I'm going up there, they're not micromanaging what I'm doing because when I'm in the crowd, I'm not micromanaging what they're doing. Maybe sometimes you'll notice something embarrassing or whatnot when you're in the crowd, but you let it go. You don't really care. And if you realize that if everyone watches you, like you watch other people's presentations, you kind of start to realize that nobody's really caring about how well you did or whatnot. And so just go up there and talk and do your best. So that was like the first thing that I kind of realized was just that you can just speak just like normal and you can take a deep breath and whatnot. The other one that I think about, this is something that I heard a long time ago, and it really shaped my experience about going into things that make me nervous. And I kind of heard this speech or whatever. It was somebody talking about Olympic athletes. They say, after an Olympic athlete runs their race and gets gold or whatever, and you ask them, how are you feeling before the race? They tend to have this common response. They say, I was just so excited. I was super excited to see what would happen. And if you think about what does excitement feel like? I mean, when you're excited, your heart rate goes up, you get a little queasy. There's like an anticipation of what's about to happen. And then think about how does it feel like to be nervous? Well, when I'm nervous, my heart rate goes up, I get a little queasy, I'm anticipating about what's going to happen. Really feeling nervous and feeling excited are not really different. It's all about the perspective of what you're looking at. When you're nervous, you're worried about what can happen. When you're excited, you're looking forward to what can happen. And I find if I feel nervous, it's because I care. That's really why. If I'm going up there and I'm nervous, it's because I care. I want to do well. I want to put my best foot forward. But that to me tells me that I care. And so if I care, why don't I get excited and just try and do my best? Because I know that my audience is not looking for me to fail, looking for me to succeed. They're here because they want to listen to me. So why don't I just do my best and not worry about it? Because by the end of it, it's going to be over and it's going to be done. And so I can just go up there and talk and feel confident in that, knowing that nobody's looking at me for fail, knowing that I'm excited and I care about this. And for me, that takes all the weight off of it and allows me to kind of sink into myself. And so I find myself when I present, I go through this short little cycle where I first stand up there before I start talking and I'm super nervous. But then as I start talking, I remember this is super fun. I'm excited to be here. And the nerves kind of go away and it allows me to just begin speaking more fluently because I've prepared. I know what I'm here to do. And you can kind of, when you watch your audience, you see that they're listening to you, especially if you're presenting for something like a case competition. They're asking you to be there. So they're actually paying attention to what you have to say. When you realize that they're not, on their phones or whatnot, and they're actually caring what you say, it allows you to relax and kind of think about it as a conversation. So those are my two big tips I'd recommend for public speaking is, think about what it's like to be an audience member and know that if you're nervous, you're excited because you care. And so focus on the excitement rather than the nervousness.
That's an amazing perspective to have, especially the last part that you said right there about nervousness and excitement being about the exact same feeling. That's something that I started reframing my mindset on, and specifically telling myself anytime that I feel like I'm nervous, I'm just super excited. Like, oh
Yeah.
man, this is so fun. I'm so excited to do this podcast with
Uh-huh.
Bryce today. It doesn't matter, like any sort of things like that, where if you just reframe it and tell yourself enough, then you end up getting to a point where anytime you start to feel nervous, you just immediately like, I'm excited. This is great.
Mhm.
And then you just go for it. It's super cool.
Yeah.
I think those are some great tips from you. I want to move back a little bit and kind of see where you started at and how you were able to work into this person who's giving amazing presentations, starting clubs and whatnot. I want to see if you could take us back to maybe whenever you were in high school or so, and what your mindset was around that time and kind of who you were back then.
When I was in high school, I mean, I was definitely a little bit more quiet. I'm still much more of an introverted person, but I was more shy. I definitely struggled with being more mellow. It's a little bit of depression at times, and kind of just found myself more as a reserved person, always nervous, anxious, and things like that. But for me, what really started to kind of change my perspective was this idea that I have about awareness precedes understanding, right? It's if you can be aware of what's going on, that is the first key to start to understand your situation, and understanding leads to solutions. It leads to changing in your life. And so I would just kind of find myself whether I be nervous or whatnot, trying to think about why do I feel that way, or more just trying to be aware of the fact that I do feel that way, and what does that mean for me. And so if I was nervous about something, like going to that, talking about presentations, right? You feel nervous, but are you really aware that you're nervous? And when you become aware that you're nervous, you can kind of see that for what it is. I am nervous because I'm afraid of how people are going to think of me. I'm nervous because I'm afraid that I won't succeed. I'm nervous because I'm worried that I'll embarrass myself, things like that. But when you start to have that space between your experience and your awareness of it, you can begin to understand your approach and whatnot. And so that's what really made me get to this mindset of realizing, like being on stage, that nobody's out there looking for me to fail, is because I could say, I'm worried because I'm worried people are thinking about me in a way that makes me that they're looking for me to fail. But I think, oh, when I'm in that situation, I don't feel that way, right? That's not what I'm looking from that perspective. And so what I would say what really kind of helped transition me from being more nervous, more quiet, more depressed, and things like that was trying to be aware of what I'm actually experiencing and why I'm experiencing those things. And when I started to see that, I was able to look at the perspective I was looking at the world from. And when you can see the perspective you're looking from, that allows you to realize you can move that perspective. But until you step back and you look at where the camera's pointing, you're going to get stuck in that frame. And so I would say awareness precedes understanding. Try and really step back and look at where that camera's pointing. Look at what you're viewing, because perspective is really everything. And if you can step back and see the perspective you're looking through, you can move that camera. And it's a long process of doing that over and over and over and over again, because sometimes it's really hard to move that perspective because you've had it for so long. So maybe you can't totally 180 it, but you can move it 1 degree a little bit, right? And then you just see how that goes. And then you just try again. It's this focus of not trying to take super massive change in your life, but realizing that change comes bit by bit by bit. And if you have 1 degree of freedom in the choices you can make, you can get anywhere. And so being aware of my experiences allowed me to like slowly shift my perspective on public speaking, on worrying about tests. So like one thing about school, right? I remember looking at people in high school and seeing how nervous they were about, they would take a test and then be nervous to get their grade back. And I would think, well, you won't know what your grade is until you get it back, right? It's all out of your control. So what's the point of worrying about it for that time frame, right? Because you're going to get the grade at some point and you've already done everything you can. So why not just let it go until then? And I noticed that it was something I struggled with. And I realized it because I was wondering, why am I nervous after I did my test? Every time I take a test before, I've done pretty well. So why am I worried that this time I'm going to absolutely fail? And so kind of starting to slowly realize, okay, I can be confident in the fact that I've done well in the past and I put the preparation in And so why don't I try and shift this perspective a little bit so I don't have to worry about it after the fact? Or the other one I think about is being worried when you're super busy. Am I going to get things done on time? It's like, well, if I think back, every time I've had a deadline, I've turned it in on time. And so do I really need to be super worried about the fact that I'm not going to turn it in this time? I just have to be confident in the fact that I will. And I think it's those slow perspective shifts that allow you to kind of begin to reshape yourself into the direction you want to go.
You talked a lot about becoming aware of situations and perspectives. How were you able to become aware of the situations that you were in so that you could shift your perspective to more positive light?
I'd say two things. One is an in the moment thing, which is probably the hardest thing to do. So if you're in the moment in your experience and emotion, there's a moment there where you can take a deep breath and say, let me just see what this is. Let me just see this feeling. And that can be really hard when you're in a social situation because things are moving and things are happening right now. But whenever you feel an emotion, I would recommend just trying to take a deep breath and look at it and just experience it. You don't have to do anything with it. You just have to see it. And a lot of times seeing the emotion will kind of start to bring the perspective of where this arose. And sometimes seeing the emotion is all you need to let go of the emotion in that direction. The other thing I would really recommend is let me just think about how I want to say this really fast. With awareness, I would say there's a really important need to be bored in your life. And this is something that I know I've struggled with is the desire to distract myself. Like I love watching YouTube videos. I love learning things, but being bored is one of the best things you can do to help kind of build awareness. Because if you're always on your phone, if you're always like, whenever you have a dull moment, if you pull out your phone to do Instagram or whatnot, that is a moment where you're no longer taking away your awareness from the present and you're experiencing this thing. And if you find yourself every moment of the day doing something, you're not going to have the space to become aware. And so I'd say like a really important thing would be to be bored. So for me, I don't have any social media. I don't have Instagram. I don't have Snapchat. I don't have Facebook. Nobody our age has Facebook anyway, but I don't have any of it and I never wanted it. But for a long time I had YouTube on my phone and I found myself, I remember in high school, like I would get out of class and I would like watch a video or whatnot. And I said, you know what? I'm getting rid of this. I'm taking YouTube off my phone. And it's really strange when you do something like this, you'll find yourself pulling your phone out and you'll be like, why am I doing this? Because it just becomes a natural reaction. But when you start to eliminate the things in your life that fill in the empty space, you kind of start walking in silence. You start just kind of sitting at your desk and just you have yourself 5 minutes to think. And in those moments, you allow yourself to become aware. And this is also, I think, something that's helped me fall asleep better because a lot of times, if you spend your whole day distracted, by the time you get in bed, it's the first quiet moment you've had, and your mind starts racing. And you're like, oh my gosh, I got to think about all this stuff. But if you get rid of that earlier in the day, right? If you're just going for a walk between classes, or you just have like 10 minutes to sit while you're eating your meal instead of watching the YouTube video while you're eating, that's a moment right there when you can kind of flush out that stuff, become aware of what's going on in your experience. And then it makes it a lot easier throughout the rest of your day to kind of let those things go. But I would really say finding times to be bored, letting yourself have moments of silence is the biggest thing that you can do to help yourself be aware. Because as long as you're stimulated, you can't take that moment to look back and see your perspective.
I have a bunch of things to say off of that. It just reminded me of a bunch of stuff that I've tried. I like to do a bunch of different experiments in my life where I switch stuff up and then try and see how it's going to affect my life and if it's more productive or more focused or whatever. One of the things that I did was delete social media for at that point, which was just indefinitely. And as soon as you delete all of your social media, and you could probably attest to this because you don't have any, but exactly like you said, you begin pulling out your phone and then there's like nothing there. Like I remember I wouldn't switch up my home screen. This is kind of funny, but I had everything on my home screen and I would pull up my phone and I'd immediately like click right where like Instagram was supposed to be and it would be nothing. So to hack that, this is how I started reading. Like seriously, I switched up my phone screen and put the books app where I would always go into Instagram. So I would open up my phone and then tap like I was supposed to go to Instagram and it would put me up right into the books app. And I was like, well, I already have nothing to do now, so I might as well read. And I did that. That was October of 2022. 2, I think it
Hmm.
was. And that's whenever I started reading a crazy amount of books. And I got like, I don't even know the amount of books, but it was like an insane amount of books within like a week. And I was like, man, this is insane. Like books are a real thing that I could just sit here and read instead of
Yeah.
being distracted by all this other stuff. And then your point of being bored, that's something that I've embraced to the fullest extent. I started meditating like years ago, like in
Hmm.
2021, the end November, and having that stillness of just nothing over time has been amazing. I have social media now running stuff for the podcast. I have my
Yeah.
own one as well back, but I frequently try to get myself to just step away and not touch anything. And
Hmm.
that's something that usually in the mornings what I do. And I want to hear your thoughts on different routines and whatnot, because my morning usually looks the same, especially with no phone, nothing. And it's usually just the same type of stuff where I'm limiting all my inputs. I think that's a big thing is limiting your inputs, like limiting social media or limiting all the things that you have going on in your life. It really frees you up and lets you cultivate that creativity that you might need or lets you become aware of the situation so that you can switch your perspective and really get yourself moving in the
Hmm.
correct direction or the direction that you want to move in your life.
Yeah. In terms of routine, that's one thing that I think I could work a lot more on in terms of having a more consistent morning and night routine. For me, sometimes it has to do with school schedules, in the sense of not every day looks the same. Like when I worked this summer at an internship, it was really easy to have a routine. Like every day, same thing. Like woke up at the same time, ate the same food, went to work, went to the gym, straight back. But when your schedule's a little bit different because classes are at different times every day, it's sometimes a little harder for me to hold a routine. But for me personally, I have a lot of trust in myself. It's like I know I'm going to get to the gym, right? If I'm going to the gym today, I'm going to find the time and I'm going to get there. And so I think routine is something that I could work more on. But what works for me right now is just having a lot of trust in myself that when I have certain expectations for myself, I'm going to do those things and it's going to get done. And I do have particular blocks in my day where I find myself, this is the time to do homework. This is the time to do emails. It's the time to go to the gym. And it's generally consistent, but it allows me to still be pretty flexible. If somebody wants to meet with me, whether it be like an informational interview for the fellows program or I want to get lunch with a friend, things like that, I can be pretty flexible on those things. So routine is something that I need to work a little bit more on, but I am pretty much a creature of habit. And so things like meals and meal prepping and the time I go to the grocery store is like always the same every week. So in some ways I have a pretty strict routine, but other ways it's pretty loose.
So you have almost the ability to kind of flow when need be, but then you have the time to yourself to get the stuff that you need to get
Mm-hmm.
structured.
Yeah.
I like that. That's something that I want to try and work on more because I've been I've been on multiple sides of the spectrum, and I this actually goes along with discipline as well. Where I've been specifically for routines, though, I'd have a crazy unstrict schedule where I would just lay around and had no idea, what I was doing. This was me my freshman year,
Mm-hmm.
and I would just make it to the classes because that's what I would need to do. We at High Point, we actually have an attendance policy at some of our like for our classes where we have to
Mm-hmm.
show up to them, or else you could get dropped if it's like earlier enough in the semester. So I was like, that can't happen. So I show up all my classes and I did well, but then I also I had what I was just doing for the past maybe year or so, which is putting everything into my calendar from this is going to sound a little crazy, like from my sleep to when I'm
Mm-hmm.
working out, my classes, booking whenever I'm doing assignments, like crazy amount of stuff. And then I held myself to an ultra high standard of making sure that I'm there at these times. It was very
Mm-hmm.
productive, but I feel like I lost a little bit of flexibility with that for hanging out with more people and becoming closer and developing more relationships. So I'm sliding back to try and find some sort of like middle ground right now. I think
Mm-hmm.
that that's a good perspective where you can find where you can still be super productive and actually structured well, but then also have that flexibility, like you're saying.
Yeah, I definitely look for that. I try to look for that middle ground too. So I love using a calendar. A calendar is super it's a life hack if you ask me. So any like commitment that I have to be there for is in my calendar. Or anything that's hard timed. And then I have a few like loose commitments in the sense of there are times during the week when I build my schedule at the beginning of the semester. I see here are all my regular hard commitments, and then here are my regular areas like open blocks. And these are kind of like my expectations of what I'm going to do in those open blocks. But then if that open block is from like, let's say 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. and I want to slot in a lunch at 12, I can do that. And so that's kind of how I find it. What works for me is whenever I have a commitment that I have to be there for, I put it in my calendar and I put that alarm to make sure it reminds me an hour before, a day before, things like that. And I check it every day. But then I also have these loose blocks, which I have open. But it does also require a little bit of like push and pull with yourself of trusting that you're going to get that done. And if you're in a point where you're not fully in that trusting mode, I think it's definitely useful to have more of a strict schedule. The other thing I find for me is the importance of location. I am the least productive in my room out of any spot, probably in my, and so I try and do as little work in my room as I can. And if I need to get something done, I go somewhere, right? And I'll tell myself, you're going to go here. You're going to go to the study room in Neely. You're going to go to your local library. I love going to local libraries. And you can't leave until you get X thing done or until they close, right? So you're either getting it done or they're going to kick you out. And so I find that when I go somewhere, you get dressed, you shower, you brush your teeth, you eat a meal, and you go somewhere, you're infinitely more productive than when you're, still in your pajamas in your room and you haven't left since it's like 1 p.m. And you're like, I woke up at 8, but I haven't done anything yet, right? So I really find location is a huge key. And so when I have those open blocks, putting myself in the location that I can be productive is actually more about my productivity than having the time. It's much more about putting myself in that spot. And so when I build my schedule, I try and think about where am I going to be after my class? And rather than going back to my room, I'll stay out at school or whatever and take a table. And I know I'm much more productive there than I would be coming home.
That's something that I struggled with and realized that I was able to leverage later on in college. I'm a junior now, but my freshman year, I just sat in my room all the time. And I was the least productive in my room, but I would never get out of the room because I was super shy and I was depressed at the time. And I always say the term didn't know what I was doing. I feel like I'm repeating that a lot, but that pretty much shows me like around where I was at. But I'd always come back to my room and I wouldn't do anything. And I switched that up now. And in probably my sophomore year or so, and I actually come to the building that I'm in right now, not this exact room, but I'll go to specific rooms if I need to do specific tasks because I have almost an association with that room to do certain things. So whenever I was writing, I started off a lot of the podcast stuff. I was writing a book. I still have that book, but I would go to a specific room and work on writing. And then I have another room where I'd go to if I needed to do homework. And I figured out, like you said, actually getting dressed up and like getting ready for where you're about the work that you're about to do, and then going to a different location, it basically makes you, hone in and actually get the work done because you want to get the stuff done so then you could go back home or go somewhere else or hang out with friends. I don't know if this is entirely correct, but I'm pretty sure that in the book Atomic Habits by James Clear, he mentioned something about locations as well in terms of habits. Have you read that book?
I have. I mean, there's a lot of research on the importance of location and habits. I've heard things like, don't like only sleep in your bed. Like if you, lay in your bed and like watch TV, it's a lot harder to fall asleep, things like that. Having particular locations used for certain tasks, it preps your mind to go and do that. So I know when I'm going to the library, like I'm going to do these things. I know when I'm going to like a study room, I'm going to get that work done. I have a goal. I'm saying I'm going here to accomplish X, Y, and Z, and I'm not leaving until I finish X, Y, and Z. But if I just show up and say, I don't know what I'm doing, then I'm not going to get anything done, right? Having like knowing what you're going to do and where you're going to go to do it, I find really makes me much more productive. And then I can come home and say, you know what, I can now relax a little bit, or I'm just going to go to bed because I got everything done. I have nothing to worry about. Why not get a good night's sleep? Because sleep is so important.
How have you been able to develop the discipline to keep yourself in tune with this flow-like schedule, but then also be able to get the work done that you need to get done for school or work or whatever?
So this is the thing I'm excited to talk about the most because it really brings in my love of philosophy. So this is going to be a little long. It's going to start off maybe in a weird place, but I promise it's going to end up with discipline, because I think really the way you think about things is the biggest key about like getting things done. So your perspective is everything. So this is a little bit more about mindset, how you can use mindset to create discipline. So I'm going to start in a weird place, but since I love philosophy, I love language, I love words. And words are really interesting because we think we know what words mean. We don't always know what they mean. And sometimes we'll use the same word in the same context, but it means two entirely different things. So for the concept of discipline, I love using the term of rights. So I want to give you two examples, kind of moving into this topic. So when you think about the right to free speech, or like the right to free speech, and then if you ever heard people say, like, I believe housing is a human right, or the right to housing, are those two rights the same thing? What do you think?
I would say no, they aren't,
Okay.
because you're using the word right, and it's a different context. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
it plays into your point, but
So
yes.
there's this kind of this concept that there's two different types of rights. So right, freedom, liberty, kind of all synonymous. But there's this concept of what's called freedom from, which is called negative freedom. And then there's this concept of freedom to, which is positive freedom. So the right to free speech is freedom from, like, I'm free from an obligation to speak a particular way. I'm free from you restricting my speech. Whereas the other version, like the housing example, is I'm free to live in a safe house, right? So there's two kind of different things. One is a freedom from, one is a freedom to. And so I kind of started noticing what I call these two major assumptions that I feel like people have about behavior and about why they're allowed to do certain things. So if you ever think about, like, maybe you're out with some friends or whatnot, and you're going to get ice cream and you're like on a diet, and they're like, hey man, you want to get some ice cream? You're like, no. Like, why not? Like, come on, like, why not? This kind of why not perspective. If you really think about it, there's an assumption underneath the question of why not. And the assumption is any behavior is acceptable to me unless I have a reason not to do so. It's this really high level assumption that I kind of see in people and I see in my own life, in terms of when I think about, am I allowed to do this? If I'm asking myself, why not? I'm really kind of assuming this is something I can do unless I have a reason not to do so. And this is really how we think in the United States, in like Western countries, about freedom, about rights. That I have the freedom to do whatever I want unless there's some force that tells me not to do it, whether that be the law, whether that be social rules, whether that be religion, whether that be friendships. Like, I could do it, but if there's a rule that kind of prevents me from doing so, I can't. And we kind of fall into our behaviors from this perspective, where I say, I want to do this thing, but is there a reason not to? If, you kind of, I think of it like a pinball. Like, if you have a ball at the top and it like bangs around and ends up where it is, this negative approach to decision making makes you kind of fall into your decisions, where you just say, can I think of a reason not to? No. Can I think, if not, then I'll just do it. But I think there's a better assumption that you can have, which I would consider the positive assumption, which would be no behavior is acceptable to me unless I can justify it. So it's the opposite perspective. The negative perspective says I can do any behavior unless I have a reason not to, and I kind of fall down. But the positive assumption says there's no behavior I can do unless I can justify it. And this is very, very interesting, because think about like a court case, the idea of you're innocent until proven guilty. Where you start your decision making will have a huge influence on where you end up. So we in the United States say you are innocent until proven guilty. And it's really hard to prove guilt. And so it kind of helps to prevent people from being unjustly accused. But if we had the opposite assumption, you're guilty until proven innocent, there would be a lot more people in prison, because it's really hard to prove innocence. And there's the same truth for behavior. If I start from the assumption that I can do anything unless there's a reason not to, sometimes it can be hard to find a reason not to. But if you start from the perspective of there's nothing I can do unless I can justify it, it becomes really hard to justify a lot of your behavior. And this really allows you to decide what you want to do with your life. And this is where I think you can look at discipline from an entirely different perspective. So this is where I want to go back to I know this is kind of all over the place, but I want to go back to this idea of freedom, right? If you think about freedom, there's the freedom from, but there's the freedom to. And freedom to be something requires restriction, right? So for example, if you want to think about being healthy, right? In order to be healthy, like if I want the freedom to be healthy, that means I must restrict my diet and I must go to the gym, right? There are rules that give you the freedom to live a particular life. That is the positive perspective, right? I want to be healthy. How do I be healthy? I have to create these restrictions in my life that enable me to be healthy. Whereas the opposite perspective is I can be healthy or unhealthy. And if I have a reason to be healthy, I'll be healthy. If I have a reason to be unhealthy, I'll be unhealthy. And so I think looking at discipline from a perspective of how do you create freedom in your life? You create freedom in your life through rules. I want to be somebody healthy. I go to the gym. I want to be somebody who studies hard or who's successful in school. That means I must restrict myself in particular ways to create that freedom in my life. I want the freedom to be intelligent. I want the freedom to be financially secure. I want the freedom to be emotionally healthy. And when I look at it from that perspective, discipline no longer looks at something like that's restrictive to me, but something that's enabling to me. A lot of times when I hear people talk about discipline, they're saying, I'm restricting my life. I really would love to have ice cream, but I'm not going to because I'm trying to look a certain way or hit a certain weight or run a certain race. But for me, I'm saying, why are you restricting yourself? You now have the freedom to run that race. You now have the freedom to be healthy. And so if you flip the script and you say, discipline is not about restricting the things I want to do because I'm trying to achieve some long-term goal, but you flip it into the perspective of discipline is the force that gives me the freedom to live the life how I want to. For me, it completely changes my view on life. I go to the gym because it's something that I have to do. I don't have the freedom to be unhealthy. That's not a choice I'm allowed to make. And so the gym for me is the way that I enable the freedom for me to live a life that I want to live, for me to be free to be healthy, rather than just falling into these negative decisions. And so what I would say is flip the script on your life and say, let me try and justify my behavior in a way that is acceptable to me. And it becomes really, really challenging to justify your behavior. But when you do so, you begin to create the life that you actually want, rather than just falling into the behaviors that you have because it's what your friends do, because it's what you've grown up doing, it's because what you've done in the past. And that is the perspective that I find creates discipline in my life. It makes me excited to keep it because I see how it's actively serving me, how it's creating the life that I want, and it no longer looks as this restrictive force. And so that's what I would recommend for a perspective on discipline, is looking at discipline as the force that creates freedom in your life through restricting what you can't do, because it allows you to choose the life you want from a baseline assumption of creating the life you want rather than falling into the life that you have.
Wow. I haven't heard that perspective out of anybody else, but it makes so much sense. I love that illustration of like the two freedoms, of freedom from and then freedom for.
Freedom too.
Or freedom to, freedom from and then freedom to, because wow, you almost like blew my mind with a lot of the stuff, because I thought I knew where you were going with a lot of the perspective stuff, and then you explained it in such a way that just it made a lot of sense and really justified the sense where it's like discipline allows you to become the person who you want. And I've switched my perspective, and I've gotten to that point now where it's like I'm doing this stuff for like delaying gratification for myself to become this person who I want. And it's like the better thing for me to do. But there'd be times where I'd be like, I feel like it's like restricting in a way where I'm not able to go out and do other things that I'd maybe want to do. But the way that you explained it with the real reasoning of like switching your perspective, and it's really being disciplined is serving you because it's allowing you the freedom to do and to have the life that you want, rather than being restricted in the sense where you're restricted by the life that you don't want to have because you fail to take the actions of being disciplined to allow yourself to get what you want in life.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So I first heard about this. It was it's the idea of negative and positive freedom is a political concept. So I first heard about it from this, you can look it up, this little speech on liberty by John Winthrop. I think it's from like the 18th century. And then this was further expanded on by Isaiah Berlin in his essay, A Concept of Two Liberties, something like that. Isaiah Berlin wrote this essay. And that's really what influenced my perspective on it's this political concept of positive and negative freedom. And I thought about how can I apply this to my life? How can I apply looking at things from the freedom that I can have by restricting myself? And that totally, for me, flipped the script on it, because I'm no longer worried about all these things that I can't do, because I see all the things I can do because of my discipline. And for me, it actually makes me feel like I'm not even that disciplined of a person, in the sense that I'm not being disciplined. I'm just doing what I should do, right? I'm just doing what behavior I think is acceptable for myself. And I only see myself failing to live to my standard. rather than like, I'm like, oh, I'm restricting myself. I'm like, oh, I'm just doing what the right thing to do. And I see myself mess up. So sometimes I don't even consider myself that disciplined, but a lot of times I get feedback from people where they say, no, you are more disciplined than you think, because it's all about that perspective of, I'm not viewing myself as a disciplined person. I'm viewing myself as just building the life that I want to have. This is the way you do it. You follow these rules. And the cool thing is that you can create those rules in the way that you want to live the life that you want.
How have you been able to apply this perspective to more of a long-term thinking perspective of like setting future goals for yourself and being able to achieve things that you want
Yeah.
to in life?
So I think that this kind of concept really connects to what I like to think about as the relationship with yourself. Like, you're the person that's stuck with yourself for all of time, right? And so for me, I view myself as having a responsibility to myself. And so when I think about the what I what I would like to do, it's not or the life I want to have. I think about it from that perspective of responsibility, right? If I'm responsible for taking care of this person, right? I was given this person to live life with, and it happens to be me. What I'm responsible for this person? Well, I'm responsible for keeping you healthy. I'm responsible for making sure that you keep up your interpersonal skills, that you get a job so you can take care of yourself. And so I view it as like, I am responsible for you. And so how do I keep you responsible for you? And I'm responsible for me at all points in time. And I'm responsible for my future self, right? Right now, the choices I make affect myself in the future. And so I have to think about how who I am now influences who I am in the future. And that really connects to this concept of building the life you want, right? Of if you have a responsibility for yourself, you have to view the decisions you make differently. I can't just do what I want to do right now if that hurts myself in the long term, because that's failing my responsibility. I'm no longer succeeding in being responsible for myself. And so I really take that perspective of looking at yourself as somebody you're responsible for and making decisions based off that perspective. And I also think about it in terms of looking to the future and the perspective of what type of character do you want to have. I would think character is really, really important. Some of the most important qualities and things that you can cultivate in your life, because everything stems from character. If you want to have a particular behavior, it stems out of a character that's capable of that behavior. And so I think about, who do I want to be, and am I on the direction of having that character? And having that perspective, I think, holds you responsible for the long term, right? If you think, I want to be somebody who is a leader in my family. I want to be somebody who's worthy of my spouse. I want to be somebody who's worthy of my own respect. I want to be somebody who's worthy of the respect of others, right? That really orients you in terms of long-term thinking, in terms of how is what I'm doing now creating the type of person that gets that respect from myself. Because if I'm stuck with myself, I want to be proud of who I am 10 years from now, 20 years from now. And that is influenced by the decisions I make today, right? Because if I'm not proud of what I'm doing today, I'm not proud of what I'm going to be doing tomorrow. And so let me try and orient myself by what can I do today that I'm proud of? And that goes back to building your life in a way that you can justify. If you can justify it, then you're proud of it. But until you take the perspective of, I can't do anything until I can justify it, that allows you to force yourself to really think through, am I making decisions that I'm proud of? And are those decisions cultivating myself into the person I want to be? And when you completely orient yourself on that perspective, it allows you to think really long term, but live in the present, because you're doing the things now that you believe are right, but it also functions at forcing yourself to become the person that you want to be in the long run.
That's a powerful perspective to implement. Definitely something that I want to work on. And it's, wow. I don't have much to add to that, honestly. I think that was a fantastic explanation.
And for me, this really just comes from my love of philosophy, is what I would say. Like, trying to take an approach to thinking things through that you feel proud of, right? I think of like philosophy is such a personal thing. It's really, what do I believe, and can I express this in a way that I can say, this is exactly what I believe in the way that I believe it, and I can justify that. And so I find from reading philosophy, I learned this method of thinking, this way of arguing and communicating with yourself in a way that allows you to generate ideas that you can then apply in your life. So all these things that I'm saying, they've all come for me from reading, from watching how some of the greatest thinkers in history have thought. That's the beauty of reading books, is you can see somebody who's really put lots and lots of time into restricting their ideas into a few sentences that clearly articulate what they're thinking. And if you can read that and begin to understand it, you can then try to start reflecting that in the way that you think. And that, for me, has been, I think, the force that has really helped to change my life, is taking a more philosophical approach to thinking things through in my life, by saying, can I justify this? Can I think about this from another perspective? And I personally also just find it super, super fun. I think it's really exciting to think about these ideas, and say, you know what, from all this, I can now say, I am proud to make this decision in my life, and I'm going to go forward with it. And if I change my mind along the way, then I'll have to like re-justify, in the sense of, if I'm changing my mind, it's because I learned something new, I discovered something new, and I'm going to switch my behavior because of that. But right now, I can say, this is what I believe is right and how I'm going to live my life.
That's super powerful, especially looking into philosophy. I, right now, have started to look into more Stoic philosophy right now. A lot of the books that I'm reading kind of back along that. And I've noticed that it really challenges my thinking. And it's not like any other book, like self-help book or any sort of fiction that you're reading. Whenever you really read philosophy, I feel like you really have to, not that you don't pay attention in other books, but you really have to like pay attention and like make sure that you're really thinking through. And it transcends like out of the pages that you're reading and more into your head, like to where you have to actually think about the stuff. And that challenging of thinking, and that challenging of thinking and making you think more, it allows you to be able to think through different situations and catch yourself whenever you're thinking different things. One of the books that I just finished up reading, it was by Ryan Holiday, called Ego is the Enemy. I read this entire book and I noticed myself afterwards catching myself on small things that I would do that basically would show off my ego, or even if that's just in my head to myself. I noticed that and I was like, wow, because I've read this book and because I'm challenging the way that I'm thinking, I'm understanding concepts that like a week or so ago, I had no idea what was going on. And it's crazy because it lets you pick up on certain things and become aware of them so that you can then implement the discipline that you need to be able to go and achieve your goals and become free in whatever else you wanted to do. Mm-hmm. Were there any books in particular? You said that you love to read and you love learning. Are there any books that you'd recommend or that you recommend to people that they should read often?
Yeah, so I don't really have many philosophy book recommendations, because I think for something like philosophy, you have to read what you want to read. And I'm a big advocate of read what you love until you love to read, and then you can read anything. And so don't like force yourself to just be like, oh, I'm going to read this super dry, boring book, and then you get burnt out because you don't enjoy it. So I'd first and foremost say, like, if you want to read something, do it because you enjoy it, and then reading will become less of a chore, and you'll enjoy it more. And then if you're really interested in getting into philosophy, I would say, if something you're interested in, look into that. Watch some YouTube videos or lectures on the topic, because philosophy is a very traditional subject in the sense of there's a long tradition. Anytime somebody wrote something, it's in response to something in the past. And so it's kind of hard to just jump in and say, oh, you should read this, because there's so much context around it. So if you want to read philosophy, I'd really recommend learning a little bit about the history of it, why that author wrote it, do some research beforehand, and then get into the book. But in terms of books I'd recommend, there's three main ones that I think really shaped my life. The first one is Good to Great by Jim Collins. I would say you can reading the book is you really only need to read it for the first page. That's the best page of the book. It's a great book overall. And I'm not the biggest fan of business books, but it's the one business book I really, really recommend. But the reason why I love the book is the first line: good is the enemy of great. Right? He has this perspective where it's really easy to settle for being good, but if you want to be great, you have to push past just being good. It's really easy to settle with just okay, with just mediocre, with just good. But what makes you truly successful is when you're willing to not settle and when you're pushed to being great. So that's the first book I'd recommend, is Good to Great by Jim Collins. And then the other two is much more about two books that have really influenced the way I see the world, the way I see people. So the first one is The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. It's why good people are separated by politics and religion. And that's a really, really good one in terms of that really shaped my perspective on politics, on individual people, and why kind of conflicts arise and why people think differently about topics. So again, it's a book about perspective. And so I think really learning to be able to see different perspectives is what will enable you to begin to think more flexibly and be more curious about the world. So Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, and then A Conflict of Vision by Thomas Sowell. A very similar book, again, about perspectives on the world. And they're both kind of more political in nature, but politics stems out of how we think about the world. And so I think these two books really shape the way I view the world and I view people, and has a really big influence on how I view my life and how I create decisions in my life.
Interesting. Awesome. So I want to finish up by asking you a somewhat common question, but I want to hear your opinion on it. What advice would you give to other undergrads who are looking to excel?
What advice would I give to undergrads looking to excel? I would say really, I think it connects to that Good to Great book. Good is the enemy of great, right? If you want to excel, like look for that fire that pushes beyond just good, right? And what is that for you? Like, what is that vision that you have of yourself? And if you can see it, if you can see the vision that you have for yourself, if you can see like, I want to be exceptional, right? Exceptional Undergrads. I think that's such an amazing title. I want to be exceptional. What does that mean to me, right? Because a lot of times people will say like, oh, I'm not exceptional, but they don't have a definition for what it is. Or like, I think one of the examples I could think of is like, if you, like, let's say you have this perspective, like, I'm not a good father, right? It's like, well, what does that mean, right? If you just say, I'm not good at something, I'm not a good friend, I'm not a good father, I'm not a good brother, I'm not a good student, what does good mean? And if you can define good, right, or you can define exceptional, you might realize you're closer than you are, because the lack of a definition allows you to discourage yourself, right? So I'm not a good friend. It's like, well, what does that mean? Well, a good friend would spend time with somebody once a week. They would check in once a month in terms of like a more serious conversation. They would remember somebody's birthday, and they would, I don't know, treat your buddy to lunch every year. I don't know, 4 random things, right? Once you know the definition of good or good, great, or whatever, you can then systematically realize, where am I succeeding and where am I not succeeding? And so you can say, oh, I actually do see my friend once a week. And I guess I could do a better job checking in, but I'm closer to being a good friend than I thought I was. And so if you have this vision of like, oh, I want to be exceptional, I want to be great, or blah, 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 but you don't know what that is, you haven't defined it, you're just giving yourself an excuse to be discouraged. Because until you define that word, you won't know what it's like to actually achieve that. And you won't realize how close you might actually be. And even if you're super far, you at least now have a roadmap to get there. And so I would say, define your goal. Like if you have a fire in you, you say, I want to be more than I am, but I'm not. What is more than I am? And once you define that, you can work backwards to get there. But until you define it, you can just tell yourself you're not there because you don't even know what it is. And so I would be really careful about that trap of not defining what success looks like, because then you'll never be there.
I think that's a great piece of advice. You won't know where to go if you have no idea where you're going, where you want to go.
Yeah. And that, again, keeps connecting to this idea of like defining your life. There's no behavior that is acceptable until I can justify it. And so if you can define that vision, you now have a point to build to. You can say, does this behavior go to that point? And if I can't justify how this behavior leads me to that goal, I won't do it. And if it does get to that goal, then I will do it. But until you have that point, that vision, that pathway, that direction to go, you're going to kind of just be meandering. And the real key that I've seen in my life of those who are successful are those who keep checking themselves against that goal, because you're always going to veer. You're always going to get distracted. And it's an ideal, like that goal is an ideal. And so you won't be perfect. But I find the joy of life is striving, is pushing for that ideal. And so being willing to continue to check yourself against that, I think is the real key of prolonged success. Because we can all like do something once, but the people who are really successful do the same thing over and over and over again. But it's because their willingness to constantly check themselves back against that vision of themselves and say, this is what it is. I'm going towards that for these reasons. So I think defining your success and seeing how your behavior points you in that direction is really the key to beginning to build long-term success.
Well, awesome. Thank you, Bryce, for your time and for coming on. I really enjoyed our conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to add on at the end here?
Thank you so much, Jack. Like I really enjoyed being here. The last thing I guess I would add is the importance of exercise. Exercise. We didn't talk about it much here, but exercise has changed my life. You're like, especially when we talk about success, we talk a lot about the brain. We're in school all the time. We always think like the brain is the key to success, right? We live in a knowledge economy where most of your work is mental, but the body is the hardware for your brain, so to speak. It's like if you think about a computer, if your brain's a CPU, you need a good coolant system. You need a good power supply, things like that. So do not ignore the body. Exercise for me has completely reshaped my life. It's made me more productive. It's made me happier. It makes me sleep better. Makes me more confident. And so I would not neglect exercise. And I'd say being active 3 days a week for 30 minutes a week is just a huge transformation in your life. You don't have to be a bodybuilder. You don't have to lift weights. You can run, you can swim, you can dance, you can play a sport, you can lift weights if you want to lift weights. But I would say having some form of regular exercise will completely transform your life.
Awesome. That's a great point to add. I know fitness has completely switched up my life as well, impacted my discipline, impacted my mentality on a lot of things. I think that's a great point. Well, fantastic conversation here, Bryce. I really appreciate you taking the time to come out here and come on, and I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I had a great time.
I hope you enjoyed another episode of Exceptional Undergrads. If you guys found inspiration in today's episode, head on over to our website, exceptionalundergrads.com, for show notes and resources from all of our episodes. We're always looking for new undergrads to showcase in future episodes. If you'd like to be featured, go visit the Apply Here page on our website, fill out the application, and we'll get back to you. And as always, guys, stay exceptional.